My name is Ashley, and at 32, I have spent the last decade steadily rising through the ranks at Preston and Associates, a corporation where I started as a junior manager's assistant and now held the position of project manager. And all that time, while my younger sisters, Sarah and Emma, were immersed in caring for children, husbands, family holidays, and school plays, I have been sitting from early morning until late at night in an office littered with reports, schedules, and strategic plans, managing teams, signing contracts, going on business trips, and dreaming of mergers rather than wedding vows. Don't get me wrong, I love my job. It gives me a sense of meaning, control, purpose. But on those rare, especially rainy evenings, when I'm alone walking home to a half-empty apartment that smells of stale bread and Laurel soap, I sometimes catch myself looking out the window at the sparkling lights of the city and wondering, have I missed something important? Something that can never be returned? No husband, no kids, not even a golden dog named Bruno, just me in my corner office on the 22nd floor overlooking the intersection where every day I see people rushing, kissing, saying goodbye, living. It was an ordinary Tuesday morning, no different from hundreds of others, when my phone rang, lying on the edge of the table between a cup of cold coffee and a stack of post-its marked important, immediately, and before lunch. Sarah's name appeared on the screen. I didn't answer right away, my managerial instinct telling me to finish sorting through the reports, but a second later I pressed the call button and, pressing the phone against my shoulder, continued scrolling through the quarterly figures. "Hi, Ash," a familiar voice chirped over the speaker, filled with cheerful ease. Sarah. She was 26. My little sister had always been like summer, loud, warm, elusive. "Do you have a minute?" "Sure, how are you?" I put the papers down, trying to concentrate, but my eyes were still wandering around the screen, noting the red numbers and the sharp fluctuations in the budget. So, Mom turned 60 in 2 months, her voice slowed, as if she was trying to find the right moment to get to the point. And, well, we're planning something special. Everyone's meeting to contribute. That made me stop. I leaned back in my chair, picked up a cup of coffee, and said, "Okay. What are we talking about?" When Sarah told me the amount, I swear I nearly choked on my damn coffee. It was more than I spent on my last vacation. Which, come to that, was 3 years ago, for 3 days in Seattle, rain, a conference, and a room with a view of the air conditioning unit. "I know it's a lot," Sarah quickly added. "But it's for Mom. You know." No, it's fine," I interrupted, already opening my banking app, my fingers sliding across the screen on their own. "I'll transfer it right now." "Great," she said happily. "Oh, and one more thing. Make sure you take a week off from work. To celebrate. Don't plan anything else during that time, okay?" I nodded, even though she couldn't see me, and muttered okay before the conversation was over and I was back to facing numbers and spreadsheets and deadlines that, as always, weren't waiting. The next few weeks passed in a blur. Meetings followed reports, clients demanded attention, and the only reminder of the upcoming event was the occasional tingling in my stomach, like before something important that you haven't named yet. Sometimes, between coffees and meetings, I caught myself wondering, where did all that money go? But when I asked Sarah or Emma questions, they exchanged glances and waved me off with easy phrases. "You'll see, surprise, it'll be great." Work took over again, and Mom's birthday slipped somewhere into the background of my life, like everything that wasn't on the Outlook calendar. And then came Saturday dinner, that monthly ritual when we all, Mom, Dad, me, Sarah with her twins, Emma with her husband, Aunt Susan and her bickering children Michael and Rachel, would gather at my parents' house. The smell of baked potatoes wafted from the kitchen. The living room was filled with voices and the scent of lavender and cinnamon. Dad was telling his ancient, ridiculously predictable jokes. As usual, Mom was bustling around the stove, carefully straightening the tablecloth and asking everyone, "Are you sure you ate everything?" And then, as if casually, Sarah, pushing peas around her plate with a lazy, elegant casualness, announced, "We've finally agreed on Mom's birthday. We're going to spend a week at Mountain Pine." The table immediately burst into a lively buzz. Mom literally beamed with happiness. Dad was already telling me how he dreamed of skiing again. Sarah and Emma were vying with each other to discuss the slopes and lifts. Why didn't anyone tell me before? I asked, suddenly feeling a thin, sharp thread of loneliness slip through the joy and noise. I don't even have a ski suit. And now there is almost no time to buy one. Silence fell. That same deep, thick silence that immediately tells you something is about to happen. Mum cleared her throat, briefly, sternly, maternally, and I knew before she opened her mouth that something was about to be said that would make everything stop, something important, something I might not want to hear. She knew I couldn't say no, she knew too well, because over the years I had said yes too often before I even thought about it, and now that yes had become something of a habitual, almost automatic response, something that was expected of me, and, as it turned out, seriously counted on, so much so that they hadn't even thought to ask beforehand. Mum smiled her tired, slightly guilty smile, and said almost gently, in the voice she used when asking me to drive someone to the airport or pick them up from school, "We were hoping you would do us all a huge favor, and watch the kids while we were there." I stood there, looking at my family, all gathered around that cozy, familiar dinner table, surrounded by the smells of fried chicken and peach pie and warm bread, and in some deep part of me I still hoped that someone would suddenly laugh, slap their hand on the table and say that this was all a joke, a clumsy attempt to tease their older sister. But no one laughed. The silence hung in the room, thick and sticky, broken only by the occasional clink of cutlery on plates and the creak of someone's feet on the wooden floor. "You want me to watch the kids?" The words burst out of me not as an accusation, not as indignation, but as something incomprehensible, almost absurd. "All 5 of you?" My mind, as if responding to a command, began to count automatically. Emma's baby Jason, who had recently learned to say the word bus, Sarah's baby Lucy, who loved to color on the walls with markers, Michael's twin cousins, Tom and Anna, who were bursting with energy, and finally, Rachel's 8-year-old son Pete, stubborn and witty, always asking awkward questions. 5 children under 7. 5. "Well, you're so good to them," Mom said, as if that explained everything, and there was no doubt in her voice, only a tired, maternal warmth. "They love their Aunt Ashley." I looked around the table, looking at each face, hoping that at least one of them disagreed, that one of them didn't think this was normal, that one of them was about to say, maybe this really isn't very fair, but no one spoke up, no one even looked away. Just these faces, expectantly, confident that I would, as always, agree. "But it's not fair," I heard my own voice, and it seemed alien to me, fragile, trembling, with a hint of resentment that I tried not to show. "I want to celebrate with everyone too. It's Mom's birthday, after all." Emma, my 28-year-old sister, put her fork on the edge of her plate, sighed heavily and said in the tone one would use with a capricious child, "You understand, Ashley, you'll still be bored there. It'll be noisy and crowded." "Bored?" I asked, not believing my ears. "How will you know if I'll be bored?" Emma, without answering, only exchanged a quick glance with Sarah, and she, seizing the initiative, nodded with that condescending intonation that she seemed to have honed since her teenage years. "You're great with children. They adore you. And, let's be honest," she paused, "it's not like you need a break from family life." I felt something tighten inside me, like there was a sharp, heavy space in my chest that no one had looked into. "What's that supposed to mean?" I asked, though every muscle in my face already knew the answer. Sarah sighed, lifting her head and joining in with that voice that was both pitying and judgmental and, worst of all, sympathetic. "She just means," she began, "that you don't have kids. Or a husband. So," she shrugged, "to get away from the rest of us, we need this break. You understand, right?" My fork paused over my plate, and the green beans blurred into an oily slick in front of my eyes as I blinked back tears. No, I wouldn't give them that satisfaction, wouldn't let them see me break down. I wouldn't say anything, wouldn't blame, wouldn't yell. I just pushed my chair back, slowly, quietly, as if trying not to disturb the air, and stood up. There was a note of alarm in my mother's voice when she said my name, Ashley. But not enough to stop me. I grabbed my purse from the counter and headed for the door, feeling each step tear me away from them, as if I was leaving not the kitchen but the life they had long ago carved out without me. No one moved to stop me. No one called out. The only sound that followed me out of the dining room was my mother's voice, tired, almost certain. "Don't worry, she'll be a little upset at first, but she'll come." Like always. As I walked to my car, their voices were already fading behind me, as if someone had carefully turned down the volume on a family vinyl record, switching to the next track, a discussion of ski slopes, winter gear, suit colors and table reservations at the resort restaurant. The evening air blew on my face, fresh and tart as cold white wine, and it was the only thing that helped clear my head of the growing lump that was rising in my throat. For 10 years, I had put others first, been responsible, been the one who offered a shoulder, who always came when called, who didn't complain, didn't cry, didn't demand anything in return. And this is what I got. But perhaps the worst part wasn't even the request itself. No, children are not a burden to me. I love them. Really. The worst part was the ease with which they decided for me, the casual confidence that of course I would agree. The way they planned everything without me, my money, my vacation days, my time, as if I wasn't a person, not a sister, not a daughter, but just a function. A resource to be used. Without, please, without, do you want this? I spent half the night pacing my apartment, barefoot, drinking cold tea, wearing a t-shirt with the logo of some old hackathon on it, and I was replaying every family dinner, every Christmas, every Thanksgiving, every time I'd given up everything for them, and now, looking back, all those moments, all those sacrifices, were starting to take on a different, darker hue. I was 16 when I first realized that in our family, help wasn't asked for, it was expected, like warmth in the summer and snow in the winter, and that night, while my mother was helping Emma with her homework, I was standing at the stove, stirring the macaroni and cheese, watching it bubble and swirl in sticky sauce, wishing someone would just say, "You're doing great, Ashley." I was 18 when I turned down a spring break trip with my friends. We'd planned a lakeside getaway to a rented cabin with bonfires and wine and late-night conversations, but I stayed home to watch Sarah because Mom and Dad were going on a weekend wine tour and someone had to stay with her, and of course that someone was me. And at 21, working 2 jobs to cover school and rent, I'd scraped together enough money from my small stipend to buy Emma's prom dress, and she'd cried tears of joy, and I felt like I'd done the right thing as I fell asleep at the cash register at my part-time job at a bookstore. But now, years later, those images kept coming back to me, one after another, surging from the depths of my memory like clips from an old movie in which I'd always played a supporting role, unnoticed but vital. Victim after victim, all for them. "Ashley, can you watch Jason for a few hours?" Emma's voice echoed in my head, over and over, at the most unexpected moments. "I really need a break." "Ashley, could you take the twins for the weekend?" Michael's familiar request sounded like a broken record that no one tried to change. "Rachel is overwhelmed with Pete, and you're so good with kids." I always said yes, always, even when I had important meetings the next morning, even when I came home from work with my eyes shining and my back aching from sitting at the computer. I prided myself on being reliable, being the one you could count on, the perfect daughter, the sensible sister, the quiet heroine of the family's everyday life. I collapsed on the sofa. The leather upholstery was cool and smooth, as if it were trying to cool my awakened heart. There were old photo albums on the coffee table, and I reached for them without thinking, as if I hoped to find something in the pages that would explain why this had happened. There were family vacations where I was always behind the scenes, camera in hand, capturing moments without being a part of them. Holiday gatherings where I stood in the kitchen, cutting fruit and washing dishes, while the living room echoed with laughter and the clink of glasses. When was the last time someone asked me what I wanted? Sarah's line, "It's not like you need a break from family life," echoed in my head with a venomous echo, as if she had decided that my days weren't real, that my sleepless nights, my projects, my clients, my victories, didn't matter just because I wasn't a mother, not a wife. As if everything I'd done didn't count. Because it didn't fit into their worldview. As if my sacrifices weren't worth anything because they weren't made for the kids. Sleep wouldn't come. I tossed and turned, remembering how I'd worked in college on a scholarship, not wanting to burden my parents, how I'd gotten my first job right after graduation so that Emma and Sarah could finish their educations without debt. I remembered how I'd stayed in the office late at night, stretching out the workday until I was exhausted, and then transferring part of my paycheck to my mother, for the household, for medicine, for Pete's birthday. And by morning, Sitting on the edge of my bed with a cup of too strong coffee, I decided I didn't want a scene, didn't want to create family drama that would come back to haunt me at Christmas and Thanksgiving. I'm not a confrontational person. I never have been. I just want them to understand. So I did what I always do when I have a problem. I tried to solve it. On Sunday morning, at a reasonable hour, I picked up the phone and called. Mom answered on the third ring. "Hi, Mom," I said, trying to keep my voice calm, even. "I was thinking about going to a resort. I have an idea. I'll pay for a professional sitter. For all 5 of us. So we can all really relax and enjoy the holidays together." There was that thick, awkward silence on the other end of the line, the kind you get when you realize your idea has missed the mark. It lasted a little longer than it should have. "That won't work, Ashley," Mom finally said, her voice tight, with that edge of disappointment I used to hear when I forgot to take out the trash. "We can't trust some stranger with kids. They're used to you." "Mom, I want to be part of the party, too," I tried to explain, putting everything that had been building up inside me, everything that hadn't been said over the years, into my voice. I could find a good nanny. With recommendations. Trustworthy. Professional. "You're not exactly," she interrupted, her voice suddenly sharp as a whip. "A social butterfly. You'll probably be uncomfortable with all the hustle and bustle. Either way, the kids will keep you busy, and you'll enjoy spending time with them. It's perfect. For everyone." The click of the call ending echoed in my ear, dull and harsh, like someone had slammed a door in my face. I sat there, phone to ear, as if hoping she'd come back on the line and say, "Sorry, I didn't mean to," but nothing happened. Just silence and the knowledge that she hadn't even bothered to say goodbye. I kept looking at my phone, as if it might offer an explanation, an excuse, a way to dispel that sharp, burning chill that had remained after my mother had cut the call short without so much as a goodbye, and as I replayed her words in my head, trying to figure out where it had all gone so wrong, the screen came alive again, vibrating and flashing a name, Sarah. "How dare you," she hissed before I could even draw on a breath to say hello, her voice thick with anger, as if I hadn't offered a solution, but rather betrayed someone. "Mom just told me about your little babysitting suggestion. You're trying to ruin everything." I sat up, clutching the phone tighter, the words catching in my throat as I tried to figure out where the hostility in her voice was coming from. Ruin everything? I'm trying to find a solution that works for everyone. We already have a solution. Sarah's voice rose, higher, sharper, more pointed. It's all planned out, Ashley. Everything. And now you're being selfish, trying to change our arrangements at the last minute. The accusation hit me like a slap, hot and humiliating. Am I being selfish? Am I being selfish? Yes, she answered without a shadow of a doubt. We've been planning this for weeks. Everyone is so excited. The resort is booked, the activities are planned, and now you, with your whims, want to ruin everything, just because you can't do one thing for your family. My hand began to shake, and I felt a wave of heat, either from shame or rage, flood my face. One thing? I asked again. Are you serious? Seriously. And you know what? Her voice turned icy. If you ruin this trip for everyone, if you ruin Mom's birthday, don't bother talking to me anymore. I'm serious, Ashley. The line went dead. I sat there, still holding the phone to my ear, as if refusing to believe that she'd actually spoken to me like that this wasn't some nightmare I was about to wake up from. But it was reality. Cold, harsh, unbearably real. And, as if the universe had decided to finish me off completely, the phone vibrated again, this time with messages from Sarah. The first, family sticks together. The second followed a few seconds later, we all help each other. The third, a little longer, remember how I watered your flowers last year while you were at a conference? And another, you're good with kids, they love you. Why can't you forget about being touchy and think about what's best for the family? My fingers flew across the keyboard, without thinking, without filtering. A real family doesn't use each other. A real family respects the wishes of its members and includes them in its plans. A real family doesn't manipulate feelings or make someone feel guilty when they want something for themselves. I watched the three dots, the answer key, appear and disappear again. But there was no answer. And then, sitting in the silence, in the apartment where even the refrigerator seemed offended by her words, it dawned on me how it all happened. How they asked me for money without explaining what for. How they said so easily and carefully, "Take a vacation," without mentioning that they were talking about a resort. How they had announced the decision, over family dinner, between laughing children and cinnamon pie, as if it had been written in stone and my participation was the default. How they had orchestrated it all in secret, while I worked until night, babysitting their children, supporting, comforting, filling in. How they had used my money, made my schedule, decided for me. And all this without a single conversation, without participation. As if I was not a person, but just an extra pair of hands. And now, when I refused to play by their script, they had gone through the motions, as if by a manual, from one form of pressure to another, frets, guilt, emotional blackmail, anything to get me back into the box they had built for me, carefully, year after year, wall by wall. But something strange happens when you finally see through the fog of manipulation. Suddenly everything becomes crystal clear. I felt as if someone had opened a window and fresh, cold air had rushed into the room. My chest felt lighter, freer, and the guilt that had been dragging me around like a chain suddenly loosened and was replaced by something else, determination. I opened my laptop and started searching. Not knowing exactly what I was looking for, but knowing that it had to be mine. Within an hour, I had booked a hotel, small, cozy, on the beach in Florida, not fancy, but with a balcony overlooking the ocean, a few minutes from cafes, shops, the beach. I even allowed myself to splurge on a first-class ticket, for the first time in my life. After all, now that I wasn't planning on going skiing, this was the only luxury I was going to allow myself. After all, I deserved it. The next few days at work were surprisingly calm, as if a burden I had been carrying for too long had been lifted from me. My family stopped texting and calling, as if in silent resentment, perhaps confident that I was sitting at home, preparing for a week of childcare, buying snacks and planning activities. The thought even made me smile as I packed my beachwear, sundresses, and new swimsuit, smelling of new fabric and sea salt in my dreams, into my suitcase. I was going on a tropical vacation. My vacation. For the first time in a long, long time. In the middle of winter. Janet, my colleague, raised her eyebrows in surprise when she noticed me checking the weather forecast in Florida, sliding my finger across the screen of my phone, where under the sun and palm trees they promised 28 degrees and a light sea breeze. Sometimes you need to do something unexpected, I answered, allowing myself not to justify myself, not to explain, but simply to say these words out loud, something for myself, and to be amazed at how pleasant, how incredibly liberating it was to say them. They sounded like a light jingle of keys unlocking a long-closed door, a door behind which I had been hiding my desires, my dreams, my needs all this time. On the morning of my flight, I stood in the entryway of my apartment, taking one last look around the familiar space, books neatly arranged on the shelves, floors polished until shiny, refrigerator empty and defrosted, curtains neatly folded, windows shut tight, everything in perfect order, as always. I had put everything away, even arranging the pillows and smoothing the bedspread, even though I knew I wouldn't be there this time to rush back and answer another desperate call. "Ashley, can you watch the kids?" As it had happened too often. This time, I wasn't leaving for someone else. I was leaving for myself. As the plane lifted off into the sky, leaving the ground with that gentle jolt that always seemed like the moment of truth, I turned off my phone, without hesitation, without regret, and shoved it deep into my bag. No calls, no messages, no social media, no family requests or attacks, just me, the beach, and a whole week of silence and freedom that I gave myself without asking. Florida greeted me with a soft, enveloping air, like an old friend who hadn't hugged me for a long time. When I walked out of the airport, the first things I noticed were the palm trees swaying in the wind, the warm smell of salt from the ocean that reached even here, and the sun illuminating everything around with such a bright, almost gentle light that I wanted to cry with relief. My hotel room turned out to be better than in the photo, spacious, with large windows and a balcony that offered an impeccable view of the endless blue canvas of the ocean, where the horizon seemed like a line drawn by the hand of an artist. I heard the waves slowly crashing onto the shore, and on that first day I simply walked barefoot across the sand, letting it squeeze between my toes, feeling something extra, heavy, unnecessary leave me with each step. When was the last time I did something like that? When was the last time I did something just for myself? I swam in the hotel pool, lay under an umbrella with a book that no one snatched from my hands to ask a question. No one spilled juice on the pages. No one asked me to cut an apple or put away toys. I had dinner in a quiet restaurant right on the beach, alone, but not alone, with myself, with my thoughts, with the warm evening air, with a glass of white wine and a view of the sunset, which was so peaceful that I could not understand why I had denied myself these small pleasures for so long. From my balcony, I watched the sky turn peachy gold, not thinking about schedules, breakfasts, or to-do lists. On my last morning in Florida, I savored the last few minutes of peace with sadness and gratitude, knowing that soon I would have to turn on my phone and face the chaos I had left behind. But I wasn't prepared for what I saw when the screen came to life and began vibrating incessantly, like a small earthquake that had disrupted the harmony of the morning. Texts, voicemails, calls, hundreds of them. The timestamp showed that they had started coming exactly a week ago, early the morning of my flight. My fingers shook slightly as I scrolled through my inbox. The first messages were from Sarah. "Where are you?" "We're at your house." Then Emma, "Ashley, open the door. The kids are getting restless." Then Michael, "Hey, we brought Tom and Anna as discussed. Are you home?" Then Rachel, "Ashley, what's going on?" Pete's asking where you are, and as I read these messages, I could almost picture the scene in my mind. My sisters and cousins standing on my doorstep, 5 children nearby, suitcases for a vacation scattered on the steps, faces tense, confused, the careful organization crumbling under their feet like sand. And the tone of the messages quickly changed from confusion to panic. "Ashley, this is not funny. Where are you? Pick up the phone. What are we going to do with the kids?" they demanded. "You can't just disappear." And then the anger began. "Sarah, you are a selfish witch. How could you do this to us? Emma, I can't believe you are so immature." I continued reading, more and more distantly, as if this were about someone else, not me, not the Ashley who had given herself so completely for years. But now, in this new reality where I had chosen myself, their hysteria seemed absurd to me. "Mom's birthday is ruined because of you." Those words, typed with fury, as if pressed onto the screen, were the first to catch my eye when I opened the messages from Aunt Susan, a woman who had seemed to me all my life the embodiment of gentleness, predictability, and careful restraint. But now her words were a stinging blow. "You ungrateful little, you ruined everything. These kids were counting on you." I read those sentences over and over, numbly, as if trying to reconcile a familiar face with this sharp, hurt tirade that seemed to come from someone else entirely. The messages from my mother came a little later, in the afternoon, and they were no less painful, but far more reproachful. "I'm so disappointed in you, Ashley. I never thought you'd be so selfish, after everything we've done for you," she wrote, and each word cut into me like a splinter, even though I was no longer the one who immediately rushed to fix everything. But the message from my father, a man who rarely used his phone, and even more rarely wrote anything other than "okay" and "good," came in one short, weighty sentence. "Your mother is crying. I hope you're happy with yourself." And although it was only one line, it was heavier than 100 accusations. But the worst were the voicemails. I listened to the anger boiling in their voices, how it mixed with disappointment, confusion, and rage. The individual words were drowned out by the crosstalk, but the overall tone was the same. I failed. I destroyed. I destroyed. Messages from distant relatives I hadn't spoken to in months, even years, suddenly appeared, as if they were queuing up to throw stones. "You were always so reliable. How could you do this to your family? Those poor kids." It was as if the entire family had decided to unanimously blame me for everything that had gone wrong. I sat in my peaceful hotel room, amid the pale curtains, the coconut scent of sunscreen, and the faint sound of the surf, and read message after message, opening a new chapter in my life. A chapter in which I finally saw what my family thought of me when I refused to be their one-size-fits-all solution. The words they used, the nicknames they called me, the assumptions they made about my character, it was like meeting a whole new, unfamiliar family, who had been hiding behind fake smiles, half-hearted greetings, and requests for favors wrapped in caring packages. I didn't respond to a single text. Instead, I packed my things, packed my beach dresses, my white bathing suit with the tag, and a couple of shells I'd found on my morning walk, and headed to the airport. It was time to go back. But I wasn't the Ashley who'd left a week ago. That Ashley might have apologized. Feel guilty. Started immediately thinking about how to make it up to them, how to get back into their good graces. But she was gone. I'd just finished unpacking my suitcase, carefully hanging my clothes on the hangers, when there was a sharp, aggressive knock on the door. Before I could even get there, I heard the click of a key turning in the lock, a key I had once, many years ago, given to my mother, just in case, never imagining that one day that case would look exactly like this, an invasion, a storm, a rage. My mother burst in first, her face tense, flushed, her breathing ragged, as if she had been running. Emma stood to her left, her hands clenched into fists, and Sarah to her right, her face twisted with anger and righteous indignation. They looked like three furies who knew no mercy, and the world I had so carefully nurtured in Florida evaporated in that moment, like morning fog. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Sarah screamed, taking a step toward me, not caring about propriety, tone, or place. "You've ruined everything. Everything." I stood silently, watching them unleash their emotions in my living room, the same living room where I had played nurse, cook, psychologist, and nanny countless times, canceling my plans to accommodate their unforeseen circumstances. Mike and John refused to stay with the kids, Emma spat, referring to their husbands. They suddenly had important things to do, can you imagine? So Sarah had to stay home with all 5 kids while we were on vacation. She missed Mom's birthday because of you. The whole trip was ruined, Mom added, her tone rising as if under the weight of her own accusation. No one could enjoy the moment. All we did was talk about how you betrayed us. How you let everyone down. They stood in front of me, my family, my blood, the people I had given so much to without asking for anything in return, and looked at me like I was a stranger. I listened to them without interrupting, without making excuses, simply inhaling every drop of poison so that later, perhaps, I could finally be free of it once and for all. "Your father couldn't even ski properly," my mother shouted, as if this were the final and most compelling argument for how much I had ruined the party, and there was such passionate resentment in her voice that for a moment it seemed to me that she was talking not about the birthday, or the resort, or me, but about something much deeper and older. They continued their tirade, interrupting each other, with such zeal and drama, as if they were competing to see who could express their disappointment louder, who could strike more accurately, who could find the most offensive words to drive me into a corner. Each of them spoke as if something important depended on it, as if it was absolutely necessary to speak out while I was still standing and listening, while I had not yet left completely and irrevocably. And the more they talked, the more fiercely they defended their view of the situation, the more absurd it all seemed, as if I were watching a badly staged play from the outside, where all the actors suddenly started forgetting their lines and shouting. And then something inside me broke, not in the way they might have hoped, not in hysterics, not in tears, but in a fit of genuine, liberating, almost insane laughter. It burst out of me unexpectedly, like a drawn-out breath, a stifled chuckle that suddenly became a full-blown roar, and it cut through their accusations like a knife through paper. They stopped mid-sentence, all 3 of them, and stared at me with expressions of shock and fear, as if I had suddenly gone mad. "What's so funny?" Mom asked, her face turning even redder, her voice breaking. What could be funny about this situation? I wiped away the tears that had come not from pain but from pent-up tension, and said, still grinning, "Can't you see how ridiculous this is? Can't you really see how absurd this all sounds?" "Absurd?" Emma asked, frowning. "What's absurd about you secretly planning this entire trip?" My laughter died down, but my voice remained calm, almost level, like water after a storm. "Me? Planned it?" You decided, without asking me, that I would watch your kids. You took my money, told me to take time off from work, and then just assumed that I would fit in with your plans. And now, when everything fell apart because of your own assumptions, you stand here and blame me. The villain. But you always helped before, Mom muttered quietly, as if she didn't quite believe it herself. Her voice was quieter, and there was something like embarrassment in it. That's exactly the problem, I interrupted her, no longer trying to be gentle. I always helped. And you started taking advantage of that. You stopped seeing me as a person. You stopped seeing me as a daughter, a sister. You saw Ashley as just a resource, a free nanny, a safety net. You stopped considering my feelings. My plans. My life. That's not true. Sarah protested, but her voice wasn't as confident as before, and I noticed her shoulders slump a little. I raised an eyebrow. Really? Then tell me, why didn't you include me in the planning? Why didn't you ask if I wanted to go on a vacation? Why did you just assume I'd be happy to stay home with 5 kids while everyone else celebrated? I searched their faces for some understanding, some acknowledgement that they understood how unfair they'd been. But all I saw were frozen, tense faces, where instead of regret, there was cold resentment. You're selfish, Mom said, her voice as cold as ice. You ruined my birthday. You hurt your sisters. You disappointed the kids. I didn't raise you that way. And then I felt something snap inside me. The last spark of hope went out, the last expectation that she'd even be on my side for a moment scattered like ashes in the wind. No, Mom, I said quietly but firmly. You're the one being selfish. This whole situation is your doing, not mine. It's your fault, not mine. Mom sat up straight, her face set in stone, her features frozen in an expression of icy contempt. If that's how you feel, she said slowly, then maybe I don't have a daughter named Ashley anymore. If that's what you want, Mom, I said, looking her straight in the eye, then so be it. 6 weeks had passed since then. 6 long, difficult, but incredibly cathartic weeks of silence. During those weeks, my apartment became my temple, my sanctuary. In that time, I hadn't received a single call, not a single message from those who used to think it was normal to call at any time of day or night. Just the occasional notification when one of them posted another thinly veiled message on social media, like the one my mom had written last week. Some people only think about themselves, followed, like clockwork, by a dozen sympathetic comments from family and friends who only knew her side of the story, in which I was, of course, the ungrateful daughter who had broken her mother's heart. Family should always come first, one of her friends had written, and I was staring at the screen and thinking, yes, but whose family, and by whose rules? Sarah had posted a photo of her daughter, Lucy, standing on a sunny lawn clutching a basket of flowers in a pink sundress yesterday, with the caption, "Such a blessing to have people in my life who understand what that really means." Emma's final post, which came just hours after Sarah's, was a long, colorful paragraph about toxic people who destroy family bonds with their selfishness and refusal to engage in the lives of their loved ones. She didn't tag me, of course. Emma was always clever enough to avoid direct accusations, but it was written so transparently that even a casual reader would have known who she was talking about. A few months ago, those words would have cut me to the core. I would have read them over and over, turning each phrase over in my head, trying to come up with a response that was poignant, bitter, exculpatory. I would have lost sleep, staring at the ceiling, wondering if they were right after all, if I had let them down. I would have tried to convince myself otherwise, attributing their harshness to fatigue, tension, stress. But now, as time has passed, I only occasionally skim through their posts, fleetingly and with a slight, barely noticeable smile on my lips, noting how predictable their words have become, as if I were reading a familiar chapter of a book that I used to take too seriously. I changed my routine. Where there used to be anxious weekends, when every phone call could be another request to sacrifice my plans, there were now simple pleasures, morning walks, a cup of coffee with a book, silence unburdened by anyone's needs. I joined a local book club. The first meeting seemed almost surreal, sitting in a cozy coffee shop on a Saturday morning, listening to people talk about books, sharing my thoughts without the fear of the phone ringing with another plea to keep an eye on them for just a few hours. Last week, I booked another vacation, a trip to Europe this spring, to a city I've dreamed of since my youth. I didn't check anyone's schedule, didn't ask permission, didn't try to please. I just saw the offer, smiled and clicked book, like a person who for the first time in her life understood that freedom is not only the absence of shackles, but also the absence of fear that someone will be disappointed with your choice. In quiet moments, when I sit alone in a chair by the window, with a book in my hands or just listening to the rain patter on the windowsill, I sometimes think about my nieces and nephews. Yes, I miss them. Their ringing laughter, the way they clung to me like a faithful beacon in the adult world. But I don't miss the way they were used against me, as a tool of pressure, as a cover, as an excuse for other people's expectations. I hope that one day, when they grow up, when they learn to see the difference between care and manipulation, they will understand. They will understand that Aunt Ashley loved them, but she could no longer sacrifice herself. Maybe they will even recognize the same patterns in their own lives and make a different choice, in their favor. I still have the emergency key, the very one my mother used on that last day when she burst into my apartment with reproaches and tears. I have often thought about returning it, just putting it in an envelope and sending it back, like a symbolically completed chapter. But every time something stops me. Maybe it is the stupid, childish part of me that still hopes that one day they will understand. That one day they will call and say, "Sorry. We were wrong. We loved you, but we did not know how to show it correctly." That they will see how unfair their actions were, how they used my love as a resource, as an automatic yes that can always be relied on. That they will understand, family is not about sacrifice at any cost. It is not about silently bending to someone else's needs. It is about respect. About choice. About seeing a person, not a function. But I don't wait for that day anymore. I don't put my life on hold hoping to be understood. I don't look into other people's eyes for approval. For the first time in my life, I put myself first, not because I loved others less, but because I finally learned to love myself. Yesterday, I deleted the family group chat from my phone. Without any fuss, without a pompous goodbye message. I simply hit delete, as quietly as I closed the door to my apartment for the last time that day. Just one more step. One more obligation I've freed myself from. One more source of tension I've let go of, like a balloon, up into the sky, without regret. Some might call it selfish. I'm sure my family does. But I've learned that there's a fine line between selfishness and self-respect, but it's vitally important. Sometimes the kindest, most mature thing you can do is step away. Walk away from people who see nothing in you except what you can do for them. And then, in that silence, in that freedom, real life begins. Mine.